Okay, welcome to the OLM Upstream Working Group. Today is Thursday, May 20th, 2021. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm just going to take a look at the agenda. Looks like we have a couple items from Joe. Joe, do you want to kick us off?
That's not me, is it?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
Joe, yeah,
Joe
Joe.
Heisinger looks like his mute. Can't tell if he's connected quite or not.
He's not. His account's not muted, but if he's trying to talk, I can't hear him.
Well, Joe
Okay.
works with me, but I can we can skip him temporarily until he gets hooked up. I know Piotr has a question. I know he's on.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Why don't we jump to the last item and then work our way back up afterwards?
I know Michael Cheng also has a question. He just doesn't put it in the. I'll put it in the question in there for him.
Cool. All right. Well, Piotr, discuss automatic manual side effects, and you've got a link to an upstream issue. Want to speak to that one a little bit?
Yeah. So perhaps instead of deep diving into the issue, let me bring in the use case, right? That we run into, and actually this issue is kind of a something which actually makes this use case not possible. So imagine a scenario that I have a namespace and I have three components deployed there, right? Those three components are part of the overall solution living in the same namespace, and those three components are being part of different catalog sources. And they have, by definition, those three components have also different life cycle. And for some reason, we don't want to deep dive why yet. We want to have two components, being automatically upgraded whenever the newer version is there. However, one of the capability actually being, strictly controlled in terms of the upgrade. Now, the side effect of the so what we found out is actually that having just a single operator of manual approval, actually, that means that all of the other operators in the same namespace will also follow the same path, right? Meaning also being quote unquote converted into manual approval, right? So we cannot effectively achieve the goal that two guys in the same namespace, two components, simply go, accordingly to the newest possible updates versus, strictly control just one of them. And so that's the use case that we are after, right? And the issue actually speaks about it. The other observation that we found out is that also, install plan seems like being the entity for OLM is namespace, right? Not anything else, at least based on our observation and understanding, which sometimes leads to a situation that install plans are generated in such a way that they are commingled. Install plans are have components commingled between different catalog sources, right? So even if we approve one install plan, actually the side effect of it is that we may be approving just partially components that we'd like to really upgrade. So kind of opening a conversation, right? Because I understand that this issue got reviewed and actually put into backlog, let's say it this way, or triage unresolved, got stale. But actually what I wanted to bring into this forum is simply try to get your perspective on, is it intended behavior? And if so, why is that so? If not, what might be the options to address the use case, right? Not necessarily, fix the specific ticket, but simply how to address the use case that we are after. I'm sure that makes sense.
Yeah. So I can speak to this one a little bit. What you're running into is one of the more fundamental UX foibles of what we have today in terms of dependency resolution offering. So the reason that install plans are scoped to all the stuff on a namespace, and the reason why you can't block on a specific subscription and not another, is purely because, well, for the most part, it is intentional, and it is because at the time that dependency resolution was introduced as a feature, there was no way for OLM to trivially understand whether or not any subset of things installed into a particular namespace are actually dependencies of one another at all times, right? Like the dependency resolution at the time it was introduced trivially just says, oh, hey, I see your operator has a dependency. Let me go find that thing for you and create a subscription for it as well. The problem is that doing that trivially, I don't know how familiar you are with this problem, is a computationally extremely expensive problem to solve as soon as you get more than 2 or 3 possibilities.
Sure.
And so we actually did a whole bunch of work over the summer last year, building a stat solver and a new dependency resolver into OLM, partially to solve this issue, as well as a bunch of other tangentially related things. So I think we're a lot closer to being able to do something like separate the approval workflow and the current grouping of install plan based on interrelated or unrelated dependencies. It just hasn't been, no one has done the work to go and do that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's at least like what the current state of the project is. It is something we're like definitely very well aware of. I think that our current plan is we have some new APIs that sort of replace install plan subscription that would in large part address a lot of these things and treat individual operators as the top level aggregation.
Mhm.
But until a lot of that work gets done, I don't know that there's a lot of effort being put into trying to solve this problem with the existing control plan, essentially.
So what you're saying is that actually this the work that you referred to in terms of the new dependency resolver, or I'm not sure they are correctly captured the name of it, actually does it mean that it will be delivered, or actually this problem will be solved not using the existing state of the art, but actually as part of this V2 APIs that you referred to, right? So so this dependency resolver actually will be integral part of the V2 APIs. That's what you're saying, correct?
So the new resolver technically is what drives the existing APIs now under the hood as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, we're not, what we didn't do is we didn't go and implement and extract, right? Because it's kind of tangled up with the concept of install plans and the way that they define the aggregation as all the subscriptions on the cluster. So while now we have a lot of the lower level stuff to sort of build something that could replace that, we still need to go and redefine what those APIs mean in a backwards compatible way. And yes, I think our current plan is it's not really trivial for us to go and do that with the existing APIs.
Mhm.
So we're sort of tying that effort to V2 APIs that we think kind of just solve the problem a little more holistically.
Okay, and perhaps a sanity check or validation. If I were actually to have the use case that I want, again, use case 3 components, same namespace, I want to have 2 of them go, 1 of them being strictly controlled, using existing technology as it is right now, would it be actually for me to have 2 catalog sources following the latest, let's say, and simply pin 1 catalog source and simply bump up the tag of the catalog source and have everything being automatically actually upgraded, but 2 components have the latest catalog sources, whereas the one simply strictly following the pinned versions? Would I achieve the same goal? That would be your recommendation here?
I think that's one way to do it. I think you could just have separate catalogs. I
Mhm.
also think you could reasonably define this with channels for each of those packages defined in the same catalog, right? Like if you know exactly what the set of things you want to do upgrades on
Right.
for a given set of clusters, you can
Mhm.
just have a channel that only upgrades up to a specific version and doesn't upgrade further. I think it just depends on whether you're trying to do this. If you're trying to do this
Yeah.
per cluster, then separate catalogs might be easier. If you're trying to do this for a superset of clusters, managing a catalog that has different channels so that those controls can just kind of be more fine-grained might make
Alright.
more sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. Yes, it makes sense. And actually, that answers my question, right? So meaning that. So, by the way, is there any timeline for this Gen 2 APIs or V2 APIs, whatever it's called?
I don't know that we have like specific targets for all of that stuff to be available right now. I know at the moment we're starting to spin up dev work on some of the lower level APIs that we need to build in order to do the higher order writable operator API.
I got it.
So yeah, I don't want to say, you know, like 3 months from now, because that's not going to happen. But you know, on the order of anywhere from 6 months to the next year, I would guess. But
Right.
it's hard to say without knowing, you know, who's going to work on what and
I got it.
how, you know, how things get prioritized versus other unrelated stuff.
I'm wondering if it would make sense to, because there's a whole pile of use cases that are probably in the backlog, like this one, that we're kind of hoping is going to be captured or resolved by Generation 2. And Generation 2 has a few use cases defined in it, but I'm wondering if we should add a label to some of these issues that we think might be resolved by Gen 2. Or otherwise, we have to create another document that just hand describes all these other issues again.
But also, it will be a way for us to make sure, or actually to have some validation whether actually Gen 2 actually addresses this use case, and not to run into a trap that actually Gen 2 will not address this use case, and then we'll iterate, you know, for over a year again.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. I think we have a doc floating around somewhere. Excuse me. We have a doc floating around somewhere where we sort of outlined what the set of building block APIs are. And basically, like, here's a set of user-facing stories that we think each one of those things, or a concert of a set of those things, resolves. I know for a fact, because I think I wrote it down, that this specific problem is something we looked to and wrote down will be addressed by some of the stuff we're building into those APIs. So I don't know if Evan, if you have shared that thing out to the upstream group yet. I don't know how ready it is, like in terms of like if we're thinking it makes sense or not. But my guess is
you guys have shared the descoped API document, and you guys have shared the one with DEPI and all that stuff.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
So yeah, if you guys have seen that doc, I think that doc outlines this is one of the problems it's trying to solve. I'm wondering if we want to start by sharing that out as like, here's the list of problems we think we'll solve with this stuff, and then we can work our way backwards rather than trying to look over the list of, you know, 700 open issues.
Well, I'm a little concerned that I don't want to make that document a free-for-all, right? Because that's going to get polluted and ugly real quick. So they probably need an orchestrated way of providing feedback for use cases in there. Because it's just a hackmd.io thing, right?
Yeah, it is. I guess maybe one of the things we might want to think about doing is try to formalize it slightly.
I do have a doc somewhere that I don't think I've shared in this setting yet. But I basically collected up a bunch of user stories from a bunch of the epics on OLM's backlog, and just analyzed them against the new API designs. I basically said, like, here's the thing, it's a user story that's on our list. How does the new work that we're talking about address those user stories? So that might actually be a good collaboration point because it kind of aggregates all the story part in one place, and then it's easier to identify what stories don't have any answer. And there are a couple of them. There's like a little section at the bottom. Like, we just don't have an answer for these stories that are addressed by the specific set of work.
Yeah, if you could share that and then maybe just put a link in the agenda in the minutes, that'd be great. And then I still
Might
think
be
it's kind
old.
of, what's that?
Sorry, I'm happy to do that. It might be a little outdated. I'm not sure. I'll have to find it.
Then I was going to say the other thing is if we could somehow, I don't think we have to scrub every issue in the backlog, but as we discover issues like this one, right? Peter kind of dug this out of the, it's been a year old, right? And so he dug this out. It'd be nice if we could annotate it somehow saying, hey, this is covered by this use case as we discover them, I guess. We could even close them, right? Or do something to them to at least demarcate them so they don't get re-triaged over again.
Does it make sense just to create a V2 milestone and start dumping issues into there?
So I know we keep calling them the V2 APIs, but OLM is
True.
not V1 yet. So maybe it makes more sense for us to put that in like a V1 milestone. And that's part of our story of how OLM moves from a .0 to, or a 0.x to a 1.x.
Yeah, I guess more generically, I meant just a different
Yeah.
milestone that demarcates it.
Yep.
Okay, I'll go make that milestone right now, and I'll move this story into it, and if there's any others, let me know.
Cool.
I think I'm good. So thanks for this conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
Unless Joe is ready, I have some more to add to that topic. I think it's worth touching a little bit more on.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Oh, yep, we're good.
And you know, if you want to keep going on this thread, we can. I'm hoping mine aren't super long, but you want to go ahead, Evan?
Please. No, please
okay.
go ahead.
All right. Okay, so the first one, I guess, you know, one of the things we're kind of wrestling with is customers are wanting to know exactly what kind of resources are getting installed in their cluster when. And, you know, with OLM, sometimes creating cluster scoped resources versus namespace scoped kinds of things, it becomes a little problematic in a shared cluster to figure out exactly which new resources are introduced when you install an operator or operand kind of thing. So I've been doing a little poking around, and I found that this OLM owner namespace label that appeared to me like it was kind of fitting the bill here. If OLM is creating a cluster scoped resource, that label gets slapped on to that resource so that we could, in some tooling, you know, do like a label selector to identify cluster scoped resources that are created by OLM. So I wanted to just get some feedback on that as a pattern and see if I'm out to lunch or that's a good use case for that guy, and if it's going away with this Gen 2 thing or whatnot. So hopefully that kind of gives you kind of what I'm looking for. Silence, I guess. I don't know.
So I guess well, so we do have that label, right? It should get propagated to everything that the install plan applies, I believe. The thing I'm thinking about is what is the use case for this Like,
Like I said, the use case is, how do I identify in a shared cluster new resources that get introduced when I install an operator? And it's easy when you can go, there's a new namespace, you can go and pull in all the resources that got created in that namespace, but it's not so easy to find the cluster level resources that get spun up. So we're trying to find ways to be able to do that so that we can, full disclosure, hey, when you install this thing, boom, you end up with this cluster and this cluster role binding. Customer, are you okay with that, right?
so I think that makes sense. I want to caution, and the reason I want to caution is because when we do stuff like create cluster scope resources, the canonical example is the CRD, right? And today you can install multiple operators in multiple namespaces that share that CRD relationship. I believe that right now, the thing that's going to get that label is the first thing that applies it and the first thing that upgrades it, right? Like what we don't do is on CSV deletion, go and get rid of that label and replace it with some other thing that owns it instead. And so
you picked an interesting use. Because I looked at CRDs and they do not have this label, but the ones like cluster, a cluster role or a cluster role binding, which are, the security conscious guys that think, oh, okay, at least I can find those. I guess it might not be 100%, but it's, getting better than where we are today, I guess, I think.
right.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you guys off, but I know we have the label that you mentioned over there for the namespace, Joe, is obviously there, but we're also having the label selector for the component that's been using by the operator API, which is pretty much similar. It's like, I think, operator.cos.io, I think. Basically, for the operator API, we're slapping that label on every single resources that OM created, even namespace or cluster scope when you're installing the operator, that including the CRD. And for every single operator that we install a cluster, even though they may sharing the same, CRD and so on, it's also having its own label on that because using type of unique name situation there. So you can totally using that label specifically to query for what kind of resources that belong to this specific operator for that specific namespace, and that should work as well. We only have this, so you don't need to invent it another label or anything like that. Are you aware of this?
You mean with the operator? There's going to be a new label that you're going to add that's similar to this OLM owner namespace. It'll just have a different name. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's called component label that using by the operator API.
Okay. So I guess going forward, that would be.
But you would have
everything
to
would
use
have that.
you'd have to use the new operator API, right? Because right now the operator API is read only.
Yes, but the label is available for you to query. It's nothing crazy for you. It's similar to this label or label that Joe just mentioned, the om.ownership.namespace. This is going to be, I think, operators.cos.io / the name of the operator dot the namespace, and that should be the label you query.
So even if you created an operator via subscription, that label should show up on every single resource that's created.
Yes.
So Joe, I guess I don't have.
I believe.
Yeah, I don't have a cluster up right now, so I can't validate that. But I'm assuming you would have run into that, Joe.
I guess I've only really been looking at this particular label. I can do some more homework, I guess. And at this point, I'm just kind of doing some research to say, well, what's the best way to find these guys? And this one looked interesting because namespace is something we know in our pipeline, and they get dynamically created and things when we run tests. So it's easy for us to say, oh, operator installed in this namespace, also tell me the resources that are outside of it, and they'll have this label. But I can do some research. I guess what I was looking for, and it sounds like confirmation, is, you know, this approach seems good. There might be a new label in the future, or it might be there now, and I can double check that.
Yeah, so Vu was talking about the labels that make it part of the operator object. If I understood correctly, right, Vu?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. So
So the
if,
component label, I don't know what's the name that we're using specifically, but it should be a component label.
yeah, I don't remember this exact prefix either, but the other thing that does, that if an object has that label on it, then the resource shows up in the status block of the operator object. So one way to find all the resources is just get the operator object at the cluster scope, by which I don't mean CSV or subscription, I mean like the actual operator API. And in the status, that will list out everything that was installed as part of the operator. It also lists out things like the install plan that reference it, or the subscription. So depending on what you need to do, you might need to like filter some of that out. But it
Okay.
does
Yep.
list out everything.
So that's another good thing to look at. I mean, that would be a little bit, well, a couple of options to look at there. Cool. All right. And I think you confirmed or whatever. I mean, the going forward with Gen 2 or whatnot, there needs to be a similar construct to find these things. And it sounds like that the operator API might already be the ticket there, right? I'll look into that. Thank you. It's okay. I'll hop to the next question. So I actually created a ticket for this one, but we're finding that catalog source operator or pods get spun up in clusters, and they're running not with the restricted SCC, they run with any UID. So we're finding customers that are, you know, running twist lock scans on things and finding, oh, okay, we got this pod now that's not running with restricted. So I'm wondering if there's any work in flight to fix that, or you're aware of the problem, or
Yeah,
where
from
we're
an
at
upstream perspective, I guess we're looking for, can the catalog indexes run with any user, an arbitrary user ID rather than root? And then downstream, then we need that to run with restricted SCC. Because right now they run in the OpenShift marketplace namespace by default, which runs with any UID, which runs as root. And when we try to run them with another user ID, they all fail because there's permissions problems and all sorts of stuff that happens in there.
Yeah, so I think I actually, Joe, this is like directly, Joe Lanford, this is like directly related to something somebody sent our way like earlier this week, right? Like this is
yes.
this is the
This
the
is
problem. The
slightly
problem
different.
is yeah, I know it's slightly different, but I'm wondering if we might just want to try to do all of that in the same thing. Has your thing merged already? So the issue we saw was bundle images couldn't get unpacked because we needed permission to copy the contents into the init container.
Was that
right?
That wasn't
Maybe
it. This issue was when the registry pod runs, it tries to copy the database file to a temporary file, so that it can be mounted read-only, and then it gets what we saw in our bug was it gets a permission issue because it was running under like a different SCC that was deployed by StackRox, and that SCC restricted to read-only root file system. So the fix for that was for us to add an explicit security constraint or security context to explicitly say read-only root file system false. This sounds like something different where we would want to set run as non-root true, and then we'd want to make sure that the pods can actually run as non-root and have the permissions that they need to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
So that might just be like, if you can show us a reproducer and say like, yep, this doesn't work, that sounds like a bug that we could fix, or maybe we'd say that's a feature, but regardless, that sounds like something that's not too difficult.
Yeah, I mean, even like the existing catalogs that are in the OpenShift marketplace are your catalogs, or Red Hat catalogs have this situation. So it's nothing special we're doing, but.
So there's probably work to fix it in 2 spots. We probably have to fix it upstream and fix it downstream. There's probably going to be work into the Docker, the build files and so forth.
Yeah, and we might have to talk internally with our index image builder group. I know they're using like a custom Docker file, so it may be that we need to go talk to them and make sure that the way that they're building these images supports the run as non-root.
So should we create a Bugzilla for this against OpenShift to start with, and then have that propagate upstream?
I think that there's just two unrelated things, right? Because one of them is the images that get built for this downstream thing. That probably needs a Bugzilla. But there's also the problem, which is that like OPM, when it generates a Docker file for you, is not going to be able to build these things. So that to me that's like I mean, I guess a separate BZ we could do. I also wonder if we want to just track it as an upstream issue, because that's, depending on how it gets used, might just be different.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. OPM is the guy that would be scaffolding out or using whatever its Docker file and base images and whatnot. That's where the hit would be, right? Because that's what we use.
That's what would it be for your catalog images. My point was just that the Red Hat content is built totally separately and doesn't use that Docker file.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I can create those. So 2 different Bugzillas, one downstream and then one OPM upstream kind of thing. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Okay, cool. All right. Third one, I guess, and I know this may be just downstream. I'm sorry to bring it up here if it is, but so there's a new type of a resource that we're looking at. It's called a Council Quick Start. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not, but it's basically kind of an interesting thing that you can create one of these resources, and it's kind of a guided set of steps that you need to do. And the thought process here is, with some of our operator deployments, there are, say, prereqs or additional things that you need to do before everything is going to be kosher. And this Council Quick Start appeared to be an interesting way to guide a user with prereq steps or additional information. So the question here is, I mean, can we drop could we drop one of these YAML files into the bundle? One point. And then the other point would be, has there been any thought about, like within the Operator Hub UI, when you go to install an operator, there's also links on the left side that point you to the source, or some potentially point to this resource that would bring up a guided set of instructions to install or do prereqs.
So I can answer the first question very simply, which is no. that type is not supported because the list of types you can actually put in the bundle image right now is restricted to something like 10 different types, and that's it. I think we have some work to do with the new bundle API that we're talking about building to sort of, hey, can we just accept arbitrarily anything? Probably with some restrictions, but for the most part, that's kind of the idea. But right now, if we were to accept a new type, it's an explicit opt-in. The API needs to understand that type, and it needs to know how to write it. So if that's something that you guys like absolutely need, it needs to be part of the bundle, it can't be part of your operator on startup. That would probably need to be like, if it's the downstream thing, probably an RFE against OpenShift and try to get it prioritized kind of thing. It's not a huge amount of work, but it's just something that I think we're trying to avoid at all costs if we can, given the fact that we're trying to not support these extra things until we have a generic solution, if we can.
Okay.
But to the second question on the operator hub, not operator hub, and the embedded operator hub thing, I don't think there's anybody on the call that has deep insight into what is in the process of getting implemented there. That would probably need to be like a talk to the OpenShift engineering folks and find out what they're doing. We don't like most of the folks here at Red Hat. We're just the actual operator framework bits of OLM, not the console at all. We don't really touch it. So I wish I could be more helpful than that, but
No,
unfortunately,
that's fair. I'm fishing, I'm just looking to see where I can find some information. So yep. Thanks. All right. Thanks, guys. That's it for me.
Thank you. Okay. I think we have one more item on the list, which is from Michael.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, cool. So I'm running into some issues in an upgrade scenario, and I'm going to paste my error message into the chat so that you guys can see it. So my general question has to do with is about how does the operator upgrade handle the upgrade of the custom resources, and in general, how would I go about debugging an issue? The specific scenario that I have is actually pretty simple. So in the current version, I have two versions of a CRD. There's a V1 Alpha 1 and a V1 Alpha 2. And V1 Alpha 1 is not served and not stored. And V1 Alpha 2 is served and stored. And the CRD does not change in the upgrade. And so in the next version, it's exactly the same CRD. But when I run through the upgrade, I'm getting an error message in the install plan that is trying to take an older version of the resource, which does not exist in the cluster. There's only a V1 Alpha 2 resource existing in the cluster, but somehow it's trying to find a V1 Alpha 1 version, and trying to look for that, and that doesn't exist, and then it just failed. So I think the question is about how the upgrade process works and how to go about debugging something like this.
Just one other little piece of information. We've been helping out Michael on this one. You looked at the status of the CRD, and it does not indicate that V1 Alpha 1 is stored.
Right.
So I guess I can speak for this, given this is something for me. I need to look into this a little bit, and I guess I would love to see your CRD and so on, and see what it look like. But I actually never see this issue before, which is almost bad for me a little bit, to be honest. That's why I try to retry settings, because what's happening here is, I think you probably only know that when you upgrade a CRD, OM attempt to query the existing CR and validate the CR against the schema that you specify on a new CRD, even though it looks exactly the same, whatnot. And then if everything validated correctly, then the upgrade should happen accordingly. And I'm just not sure what's happening here when OM seem to having problem with query the CR and
But
fail to do so. That is certainly
should it
new to
even be
me.
trying to do that, because the old version is not even served? So why should it be looking at the older version at all in the first place? It's not even stored and it's not even served.
I think more data would be helpful here. The query that it does, like Vu was saying, we look at the group version resource defined by the existing CRD on the cluster. So if it's getting a V1 alpha 1, we don't make up the versions, they come from the query data. So it's possible that maybe we have a caching issue and we're picking up older data somehow. So if it's picking V1 alpha 1 and the CRD that's on the cluster doesn't have V1 alpha 1, that's very surprising to me. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, where would we be getting the V1 alpha 1 value from?
Okay, but for me, it's a brand new cluster that I created, in the cloud. And the only thing that I did was to install the current version, right? And I know that the current version does not store or serve the old one, right? Because that's the way that the CRD was describing, because that was for an even older version. And so the even older version doesn't exist anymore, and I didn't install that. And so the only thing that it has is the V1 alpha 2.
Yes, what's the best way to debug this? Is it is this the install plan that would be executing this and failing it, or is this going to be the OLM operator?
This would be the catalog operator is doing this. Basically, the catalog operator is the one installing component inside the install plan. That's what it does. And during that process, it's upgrade the CRD, and that when it query for the CR based on the GVK information that you specify on the CRD and do the validation. So that way you're supposed to check for this. I'm certainly can help out with this, Michael. I would love to see what's happening here, because this is certainly surprising and new to me. So I'm certainly curious on what's happening here. Because
yeah, so if you
it just go ahead,
looking
Michael.
at your source code, if you go and look at, say, line 1590, where actually line 1594, right? That seems to be where the error message is coming from. And so it's trying to get at the older version. It doesn't exist. And so it looks like the API, where if the older version doesn't exist, it would just error out. And so that's as close as I could get to where the error is coming from.
Yeah, so I posted in chat a link to the place that calls that. And the thing that's weird is that all this does is it looks at the old CRD, it walks through each of the versions there. If any of the versions is served, then it calls this validate existing CRs check. So
yeah, then the old one is not served. So okay, so that's another.
Yeah,
right,
so
the
what I'm
old
saying,
one isn't served. So how is this happening? That's the question. Like, we need a little more information. Let's try and get a reproducer, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so how would I be able to get more information?
I can reach out to you on Slack, on the Kubernetes Slack, and we can go from there. I assuming you on that channel.
I'm not, but if you send me a link, maybe in the chat, I'll join.
Sure, I will do so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, but in general, it sounds like what it does is that it would take the existing resources and try to validate them against the new one. And if that succeeds, then the upgrade succeeds.
Correct.
Yeah, but in my case, the new one and the old one are the same. And so even if it tries to validate them, they should just validate. It just seems that for some reason that it doesn't think that it actually thinks that the older one is served, even though it's not. And then it's trying to find an instance of the older one and it couldn't find it. And so that's why it's failing out. So, okay. All right, that's all that I have. So if you would send the link to the Slack channel in the chat, I'll join right now.
Hey, Michael, I went ahead and I also gave you the Slack in our little Slack thread internally. I gave it to you there too.
Okay, great, thanks. Then we don't need the one in the chat. I can just join. Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you. So that is everything on our agenda. Does anybody have anything else they want to discuss?
I guess are there any upcoming releases or milestones or anything that maybe the community would like to share with us users? What's going on? Is there anything interesting coming? I know like for example the declarative API is coming soon. Maybe the status of that.
Yeah, we're working on that. There is, so already in the operator registry in OPM, you can serve and validate a declarative config. So theoretically, if you had something that could build it for you, you could start using it. It's under alpha right now still, so we expect there may be more changes coming. There's also a PR up for adding an init and a render command, which can basically, so init can create a new package for you and output it on standard out. Render can do a bunch of image conversions basically. So you can say OPM alpha render a bundle image and it'll show you the declarative config for that bundle image, or you can do render an existing index, whether it's SQLite based or declarative config based, and it'll output that whole thing as declarative config. So these are kind of the low level building blocks that we're kind of getting started with. But all of this is still up for feedback, and we're interested in having people take a look and tell us if there's any comments they have, or if there's a different way that we could look at it potentially. One thing that we're trying to do is try to be as least opinionated as possible about how graphs get built and all of that kind of stuff. So you won't see anything in there about like an imperative command that can add a bundle to an existing declarative config, because there's some implications. So right now it's basically like, you know, here's a bunch of stuff that can be additive and you can use it as base building blocks. So that's kind of where we are now. Take a look. I'll put the link to that PR in the agenda.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I've been following the design discussions and some of the PRs, but I've frankly been a little lost in some of it, on where things ended up. Because I know things have been kind of, I mean, this has been in flight for quite some time, since October, I think. So so just one quick question then, is it possible to round trip both directions from the old and the new format? So can I export an entire catalog into and output a JSON files essentially, and then go back into a catalog, and then from that catalog can I continue using the imperative OPM commands against that? And I think that would convert it back. Okay.
So we've got the trip from SQLite to declarative config, but we're not implementing the other direction, or at least we haven't decided to yet. I don't see us doing that, because I think that would, I don't know, that seems like it kind of defeats the goal of what we're trying to do.
So if we have,
yeah.
So if we have somebody jumping the gun and starting to use declarative config before all of our tooling is aware of that, and we want to just add new bundles to an existing index, that's going to fail using OPM index add.
Right. Yeah.
So we're going to have to know.
It will. Yeah.
So we're going to have some kind of API to at least trigger and ask the index which version are you. So did you guys include that?
So there will be a new annotation on the declarative config indexes that looks a little bit different. So right now there's like a database.v1 annotation.
Yep.
That will not be on the declarative config index. There'll be like a configs.v1, with a path to the configs directory. So that's the way that you'll be able to tell the difference. In fact, that's how the render command tells the difference right now.
So when you say annotation, you mean like a label on the Docker image?
An image label, and it'll be I can't actually remember. There might be an annotation. No, you're right. It's just a label on the Docker image. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. That helps. Yeah, if you could send the PRs, for us to look at, that'd be helpful. I'll schedule time
Yep,
to.
will do. And if you have any
Okay.
questions about it after you've taken a look, you can always reach out on the OLM dev or whatever, and we can answer any questions you have.
Awesome. Any other goodies you guys want to share? Any other big things I know you guys have also worked on the Fresh Maker thing, which I think we're not going to use. So that's kind of an interesting one where you can patch existing channels. And anything else that's coming out? Is that a no?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure there's been anything since like 6 weeks ago when we
Okay.
last talked. But yeah,
All right.
I think we're kind of deep in starting up new initiatives at the moment. So aside from declarative config,
There should be a bunch of small but really valuable improvements to the UX of various resources, right? Didn't we
that's
ship
true.
a bunch of little things?
Yeah, we did stuff like just like bubbling up some status stuff to certain places in the subscription and the install plan. Did some improvements to the errors you get during dependency resolution or during install resolution to make some things more clear that you used to have to like go to the events on the default namespace, that kind of thing. I don't know if there's any like single big ticket item there, but there's just a lot of like really small improvements.
Well, those are all good because, man, that's the #1 question I get. Why am I getting a pending upgrade and nothing happens? Right. So it's like the SAT solver black box issue. Have you improved that at all in that file?
Yeah, there are some improvements there. But I think the challenge is I don't think for a second that we have solved that arbitrarily for all and any error conditions, right? Like it's more like we find the specific ones that we know are common issues and then try to paper over them and improve where we can. So there definitely are some fixes there. I don't know that there's not a now that thing works perfectly. I think we need to sort of reimagine how that content gets populated, and a lot of that gets more solved with cluster scoped or descoped resources.
Right. So is the best way for me to discover all those changes just look at the PRs that are being added to the latest milestone?
Yeah, I don't think there's anywhere where we have aggregated that information anywhere else aside from pull requests. So that's probably the fastest way for you to find them. But if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to feel free to reach out and I can point you to specific things.
Awesome. That's helpful.
Okay. All right. We've got 3 minutes left. So if anyone has anything quick, we can go over it now. Otherwise, I'm going to call it here. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.